Hey guys, Dylan from Noble Records coming at you with another video. So this week we're going to talk about the top 20 most collected albums. Now these are all albums that are really iconic, influential, and historically significant in the landscape of music. How I came up with this list of top 20, this is not my list. I'll tell you how it was actually based on raw data. So there's a website called Discogs.com, Discogs.com. It's basically a database for records and every single pressing, like whether it's a cassette tape or a CD or a reel-to-reel or a vinyl record or whatever. It has every single one of those entries in, and it's all made by people, so it's kind of like the Wikipedia of records. But within that program, you can create a profile and add records into your collection if you have them, and so then you can look back and see which records you have or don't have or whatever. So it's very commonly used among record collectors. On my Instagram page, where we have over 100,000 followers, I did a poll on there to see how many collectors had all their collection actually logged into Discogs. And when I checked this morning, it said 90%. So that's a lot. I'm sure not everybody does it. You know, not everybody is tech savvy and they want to get on their, databases and all that stuff. That's fine. But according to that website, as far as their data is concerned, these are the top 20 albums that show up most consistently in people's collections. There's a tab on, if you have the app, on the homepage of the app, it says most wanted and most collected, and that's where I got this particular list from. So it's not my list, it's theirs, but it's based on data, it's not based on opinion. If you're interested in what these records are worth, I know a lot of times people watch these videos to figure out what their records might be worth. Towards the end of the video, I'll talk about the worth point of some of these records, but right now we're just going to get into it and talk about the music and loving the music. So before we get started, if you haven't already, shoot me a thumbs up, a comment, hit the subscribe button. We love to engage with you guys. That's why we do this channel, is to stay engaged with the vinyl community. Also, we have a brick and mortar record store called Noble Records, where we buy big collections, recommend records, and we also have our own label. Follow us on Instagram at Noble Records. Now let's get into the records. Through the course of this video, I'm going to show you records from my collection that are kind of, I think, interesting pressings. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But and then kind of share some fun facts with you about each record. Coming in at number 20 is this AC/DC Back in Black. Now this is my copy. It has the promo strip. You're going to see some of my records have these on there. I collect promo copies, pretty much just records that were sent out to record stores, radio stations, things like that to get, more exposure for the band. But AC/DC Back in Black, one of the most iconic records of all time, as all the ones are on this list are. This was released in 1980. This was a huge record because, previously their previous lead singer was Bon Scott, incredible singer, and he passed away. And he was replaced with Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson was a great frontman and lead singer of a smaller band called Geordie, but very good band also. And this was the first record that he was going to be featured as their new lead singer. And the reason that they have it as all black was just kind of to memorialize Bon Scott, and it's a sign of mourning. So, but they came back strong, Back in Black. This is probably their biggest record, I would say. But I mean, I think a lot of people probably thought that AC/DC was done after Bon Scott passed away. But this was a very mighty return, amazing, amazing record. It's one that kind of shaped my childhood. I love this record. Number 19 is the Beatles' Rubber Soul. There is several Beatles records on this list, so brace yourself. But this is number 19, 1965, Rubber Soul. Incredible Beatles record. Everybody loves this record. It's great. But the Beatles, they were kind of coming into their own at this point. Before this, they had a lot of recording obligations and things that they had to do, and they were kind of crammed into a box of what they could and couldn't do. At the beginning of this record, they really started taking shape as the revolutionaries that they would become as incredible songwriters and things like that. So they had a lot more creative freedom starting with this record. And it doesn't stop there. It only gets better. But 1965, Rubber Soul comes in at number 19. This is my UK pressing. If you know anything about records, the UK and the US have both, but they have different track listings and all that. Number 18 is the Eagles' Hotel California, released in 1976. Everybody knows about this record. Great one. I knew about it as a child because I heard the whole story about the backward masking, how you could turn it backwards, and it talks about the devil and all that stuff. But this was 26-time platinum, the first Eagles record that featured Joe Walsh, which is my favorite part of the Eagles probably. But this is the Ultra Disc One Step Mo-Fi box set of Hotel California. Number 17 is Miles Davis, Kinda Blue, arguably the most important jazz record of all time. I might get some pushback for saying that, but it was an extremely important record. Came out in 1959. This is my original stereo pressing of this. And what a lineup this has on it. You know, Bill Evans, incredible piano player. John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, James Cobb, Wynton Kelly. Incredible lineup. But what makes this record so important is it was kind of a turning point for a lot of jazz. You know, so previously to this, Miles had done a lot of kind of bebop and hard bop jazz. So what that was is, as far as like music theory is concerned, it's a lot of chords and changes packed in, usually a lot faster type of music, but a lot of more complexities and a lot more chords. The album before this, Milestones, he started doing some modal jazz type stuff. But this one is known as kind of a turning point for modal jazz. A lot of modal jazz started coming after this, but this is a great example of modal jazz. So what modal jazz is basically, instead of there being so many chords, like the main song So What, there's only 2 chords. And then the rest of the music is filled by improvisation. And the jazz artist basically did what they could to make those 2 chords unique and kind of paint a picture. And it was a really important stepping stone in the history of jazz. Number 17, David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. This is the Mo-Fi pressing of this, but this album was released in 1972. And this was a concept album and a rock opera. So it was basically based on this character that David Bowie created, Ziggy Stardust. And the whole album, it describes him kind of saving the planet and all this stuff. But great songwriting. Probably, I mean, this is definitely my favorite David Bowie record. Number 15 is Pink Floyd Animals, released in 1977. This is a French pressing that they did on pink vinyl. Love this record. I mean, there's a lot of Pink Floyd on this list as well. So this is another concept album. When I say concept album, you know, for a long time, albums were just a bunch of singles stringed together to make an album. And sometimes they still are. In the early 70s, some artists started doing concept albums. And what that was is the whole album kind of created a full theme, every song being a different chapter in a story. So Pink Floyd really were famous for that. This great 1977 album, it was based off the book Animal Farm and how there's 3 classes of people: pigs, sheep, and dogs. And so this album goes through and talks about each class of people and their characteristics and their downfalls and shortcomings and strengths and all that stuff. So it definitely did not get the amount of commercial success at the time as albums like The Wall or Dark Side of the Moon. But now, looking back, I mean, it still sold a ton of copies, don't get me wrong, but people really appreciate this album as being one of Pink Floyd's best records. It's phenomenal. Number 14. Led Zeppelin 1. One of my favorite records of all time. Zeppelin's my favorite band. This was released in 1969. This was released at the very beginning of 1969 in January. And it was a highly anticipated record. It completely shook rock and roll music. Led Zeppelin came on the scene with just this incredible, thunderous introduction of Led Zeppelin 1. A lot of it is blues-based hard rock, but they had their own unique style. It's amazing. This is a first UK pressing with the turquoise lettering. I made a video about this a little while back. I'll put a link for it up at the top, but this specific pressing is extremely rare because right after this, they changed that turquoise lettering into like a burnt orange. And then here's another copy. As I said, Zeppelin's my favorite band. This is actually a test pressing. So I also made another video about this record, this specific copy, because it's very historically significant, but I'll also put a link up there. But these test pressings were sent out a couple months early to radio stations in the United States to promote the new Led Zeppelin album. So the first time anybody ever heard Led Zeppelin was probably from this specific copy. Very cool addition to my collection. Number 13 is Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms. This was released in 1985. Kind of a revolutionary album when Everything was kind of going digital. This album was recorded and intended, it was kind of focused on the CD market. This was the first album to ever sell over 1 million CDs. And so everything was recorded digitally and all that. It had to be remastered for vinyl, but vinyl, there's definitely plenty of vinyl copies out there. Incredible album. Number 12 is the Beatles Revolver, released in 1966. Again, I was talking about Rubber, so we left off at Rubber Soul 1965. This came out in 1966, where they had even more freedom. They started experimenting with psychedelic elements, and their songwriting really opened up. This really pushed the borders of pop music, and it also revolutionized recording techniques and things like that. Since the Beatlemania, since the beginning, they toured like crazy, and then the beginning of 1966, they decided to take a 3-month break. That's the first break that they'd really had. They took 3 months off, and then when they came back, they wrote this. It was a different album. It was more psychedelic. It was more experimental, all that. But it was an incredible album, and it was a sneak peek into the future of what they would do with all their wild music, outside influences, things like that. Love the Beatles. Love this record, 1966, The Beatles Revolver. Number 11, Led Zeppelin 2. Again, Zeppelin is my favorite band, so I have several copies of this album to show. But this is the follow-up to Zeppelin 1, and what is crazy is that this came out also in 1969. So it came out the same year. Zeppelin 1 came out in January. And so while they were on tour, they were blowing up. They were on tour in Europe and North America. And while they were on tour, they were booking studios and things to record the songs that they were working on. All the songs are recorded in different recording studios and then mixed all together at the end. So they recorded this on the run, on tour, all over the place, and you can hear in the song just a sense of rawness and urgency and all that stuff because of how it was recorded. And also, Led Zeppelin was just becoming this really heavy band. This is the heaviest, I mean, most people say this is the heaviest record that they did. I agree with that. Incredible songs on here, songs that really changed the course of history of music. A Whole Lot of Love has that real psychedelic passage in the middle. I love this era. If you listen to the live versions of that, I love that. Heartbreaker. There's so many good songs on this record, but Led Zeppelin 2, amazing. This is a UK press with the Plum labels. This is the Robert Ludwig US mix, super clean. And then this one is probably the most interesting pressing I have. This one is from Turkey. In Turkey, sometimes they would redesign the covers if they didn't like the artwork, and that's what they did on this one. This was only ever released in Turkey with this cover. It's just kind of a oddity, but when you collect Zeppelin like I do, you got to have them all, Before we go to the next record, I want to tell you guys about my website, Noblerecordstore.com. We have a label, and we also work with other labels, where basically, if you're tired of classic rock albums that you've heard a million times and you kind of want something new with that same sound, we have a lot of records on our website, like this one that we just released. It's called Dry Water. This is a great classic rock sounding band from North Carolina that was just underground. It was obscure. They only made 500 copies of their album when they put it out. So really rare record, but we've reissued it, and it's a really good sound quality. And then also Underground Fire, another one from North Carolina here. Sounds like the Ventures, like garage rock, a little bit of psychedelia in there, and that's on our website. And this one even has like a really cool colored vinyl, a bunch of versions of that. But and there's a bunch of other albums on there as well that you could explore and listen to some records that you might not have ever heard before, but have that same charm of the classic rock albums that we know and love. So check it out, Noblerecordstore.com. I'll pin it in the comments, all that stuff. Check us out there. The next one is the Beatles' self-titled, or better known as the White Album. This was released in 1968. And this has such a diverse range in songwriting and also styles. The majority of this album was written during this transcendental meditation retreat in India, where the Beatles got together and they really meditated and tried a different approach to songwriting. The only instrument that they had at the retreat that was a Western instrument was an acoustic guitar. They also had sitars and things like that, I think. And one huge difference in the writing on this album is they tried to use almost no drugs. Now I say almost no drugs because they always use a little MJ, but they kind of wanted to take a break from the heavy psychedelics, LSD, stuff like that, to have more of a clear mind when they're writing these songs. And so George Harrison had been trying to learn the sitar for a couple years, so he really shined on this record. He wrote some great songs for this record, and so he really came into his own as a songwriter on this record as well. But also, it was just a very different approach. It's the first and only double album released by the Beatles, and it's my favorite Beatles album. So this is coming in at number 10, released in 1968, the Beatles' White Album, and this is my favorite copy of the White Album that I have. I run a record store, and I got this in a collection. Someone had just completely decorated the White Album. They had painted this crazy psychedelic. It's like this inside and out. I love finding a crazy White Album like that. They're out there, you know, when you buy collections. Some people didn't like just the plain white cover. But, you know, the Beatles before that, the album before that, which we'll talk about, is coming, spoiler alert, Sgt. Pepper's, it had a real vivid, bright cover. They were wanting to do a complete departure from that. So that's why the cover was completely white. Number 9 is Nirvana, Nevermind, which was released in 1991. One of the most influential albums of all time. This is another one that completely changed the course of music. Grunge had kind of just been this weird little subgenre of rock that most people didn't really know about or care about. This really brought grunge and alternative rock into the mainstream's view, and everybody loved this album. It was a different type of album because it introduced mainstream to a sensitive songwriter. Most of the songs are really heavy, but also you see Kurt Cobain as this fragile songwriter. It's an incredible album. It's a huge departure from their first album, Bleach. Bleach was a lot grungier, a lot rougher around the edges. And when they released this record, it just completely blew up. It became massive overnight. Huge, huge, huge record. Nirvana, Nevermind, 1991. And this is my first U.S. press. The master disc pressing, which is, a lot of people think, which I'm one of those people, that this is the best sounding pressing of this record. It's also really, really hard to find a original U.S. press because during this time they were mostly doing cassettes and CDs. So thrilled to own this. And if you want another great video about records, this one, Chris Whitson collection, I'll put a link up here as well. I bought this collection from a family that this was basically in a time capsule since the 90s. Really interesting story. I'll put that up there. But Nirvana, Nevermind, great album. Number 8 is Led Zeppelin 4, released in 1971. This is probably the most common Led Zeppelin record that we see. It's got Stairway to Heaven on there. That's the biggest Led Zeppelin hit for sure. Incredible album. This is an original U.S. white label promo. I don't know what to say about this album that hasn't already been said, but this was such a huge commercial success for Led Zeppelin. Huge record, and one of the most iconic records in not only their catalog, but in music history. Led Zeppelin 4, incredible imagery with the hermit on the inside and all that stuff. Another great one by Led Zeppelin. Number 7, we have another one by Pink Floyd, The Wall. This came out in 1979. This is another concept album based on a fictional jaded rock star named Pink. And The Wall signifies the division between him and society, and talked about his social isolation. This also has a companion piece, which is a movie, which portrays that even more. But the character Pink was kind of based off of Roger Waters and Syd Barrett, kind of morphed into one person. Syd Barrett was originally in the original lineup of Pink Floyd, but he left because he had some pretty rough mental health issues. And so they really try to, it's amazing to me how much they try to honor him in a lot of their albums. They write songs about him and for him, and just grieving the loss of this incredible musician and visionary. So this album kind of deals with that. It talks about that concept, and it's just musically an incredible album. It flows amazing. Love this record. Listened to it all as a kid as well. This is the half-speed master of it as well. Number 6 is also Pink Floyd, and that is Wish You Were Here, 1975. This is, I don't know, this might be my favorite Pink Floyd album. I love it so much. Shine On You Crazy Diamond was a 9-part tribute to Syd Barrett. He actually, while they were recording this album, they look into the recording booth and they see this person they don't recognize, and it ends up being Syd Barrett, and they were completely shocked by how much he had physically changed. On the left side of the screen, there's a picture of Syd Barrett, and on the right side of the screen, there's a picture of him in the recording booth at that time. So this is incredibly sad for them to see, but also it was great that he was there to hear kind of the tribute that they had to him in Shine On You Crazy Diamond. The rest of the album describes the corruption in the music industry, but amazing album. Wish You Were Here. The song is an incredible single, probably one of Pink Floyd's biggest songs, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond is probably my favorite thing that Pink Floyd ever did, those 9 songs. And then so this is a first US pressing, and it is a promo with that timing strip. And this is also a promo, but this is one that they only sent to radio stations to play, that just had this plain stamped special DJ copy on it. So kind of cool. I'm a big Pink Floyd guy as well. Number 5 is Thriller. Thriller was released in 1982. It was just an absolute groundbreaking record. It fused a bunch of different styles of music together. It was a pop record, but you had the stylings of R&B, pop, rock. You had Eddie Van Halen ripping a guitar solo on there. You had some members of Toto backing the band, produced by Quincy Jones. Everybody loved this record from all walks of life. Like, you used to, people were rock people, or people were R&B people, or people were jazz people, but this really it cast a wide net. I mean, it crossed all sorts of societal and racial barriers. This was an incredible record that almost everybody loved. It sold 70 million copies worldwide. It is the highest selling album of all time, and that's if you exclude like compilations and things like that. As far as an album, highest selling album of all time, Michael Jackson Thriller. You know it, you love it. And this is a MoFi one-step vinyl of that. Number 4 is the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's. We talked about this a little bit before. This was released in 1967. Amazing record. I'm a huge psychedelic fan, so this was pivotal in the role of psychedelic music. At the beginning, this influenced so many bands, and there was other bands doing some psychedelic stuff, but before this, there was a lot of garage rock, and some of the garage had some psychedelic elements and things like that, but the Beatles really came in heavy-handed with the psychedelia on this one. They were on a lot of acid during this, so it was real trippy. A lot of things that, you listen to it now, you might not think anything of it, but back then it was psychedelic and it was incredible. And it influenced a lot of bands to venture more into the psychedelic realm. There was a huge wave of psychedelic rock in 1967, 1968, 1969. It was a huge thing at that time. So, and a lot of it was owed to the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, but outside of the psychedelic realm, the songwriting is incredible, unmatched, and a lot of people's favorite Beatles record. It's incredible. Number 4. Number 3, Abbey Road, released in 1969. This is an incredible album. I think as far as like which album has the best songs, I just feel like Abbey Road has the best songs. It's so good. I always say that the White Album is my favorite Beatles album, but this one is a very close second. And it depends on which day you ask me, probably, because I love this album so much. And this was actually the last Beatles album that they recorded. They released Let It Be after this, but that recording for Let It Be actually preceded this one. So this is the last album that they recorded together before they broke up. And I love the artwork of this. I don't know if you guys have gone down the rabbit hole. When I was a kid, there's this, we did a bunch of research about the artwork and how there's the whole Paul McCartney is dead conspiracy and all the little signs and symbols and things that lent towards that. And I just loved going down that rabbit hole as a kid. I love this album. I love the cover. I love everything about it. The Beatles' Abbey Road. It's a great one. Number 2 is Fleetwood Mac Rumors, 1977. This was an incredible album. It was basically filled with heartbreak and drug usage. It was some of the best songs aesthetically of the late 70s. This album completely blew up. It was huge because there was so much raw emotion put into every song. And the songs are so good. recently, you know, the past few years, the song "Dreams" has re-entered the charts. It's a huge, huge song, and this album is just forever immortalized. You know, all these albums sell really well when you get them in the shop, but this is the one album that, you know, it was probably, you know, 15, 20 years ago, you get this album for like $3, $5 maybe. Now, you know, it's hard to find a copy for less than $20. They come in all the time, but everybody's always looking for a good copy of Rumors. It is a classic record filled with incredible singles. Love this album, Fleetwood Mac, Rumors. This is the 45 RPM Palace pressing. Sounds tremendous. This is the best sounding copy that I've ever heard. And coming in at number one, you could probably guess it, is Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. 1973. This is an incredible record, but from a number standpoint, it sold 45 million copies worldwide. It's the number one best-selling album of the 70s and the number 4 best-selling album of all time. Incredible record. As far as a concept album, this is the first concept album that really went just huge. It blew up. It was incredible. There's so many cool things about this record. You know, you got the whole thing where you sync it up with Wizard of Oz. But apart from that, I mean, there's such great songwriting on here. It flows just, I mean, it's one of those records I remember laying on my bedroom floor with a set of headphones when I was 14 years old, just absolutely melting into the carpet, hearing this incredible, I mean, what I didn't know what it was called. It was just classic rock to me, but it's progressive rock. But it's these wild, like, Moog synthesizers and all this stuff. Just, I mean, it absolutely just hijacked my body. I loved this album. Even now, as an old man, I will sometimes lay down on the floor in my room and hear and turn the volume all the way up and just like try just it takes me back, man. It's one of those albums. It's a trip. It's incredible. It feels so good to listen to. It's amazing from start to finish, and it is number one for a reason. I don't need to say anything more about it. You guys already know. So, an amazing record. These are all amazing albums. That music would not have been the same if they hadn't been released. And when I'm making a video about this, I don't want to make it about the value of the music or anything like that, because these are incredible albums. But people are always want to know what the albums are worth. I'll put a video up here somewhere. You'll see a link of what are they worth, and a lot of these albums are on this list. But with albums like this, you know, different pressings or different versions, editions are worth different amounts. You know, most really common copies of all these are, you know, somewhere about the 20, maybe 30, $40 range. Like The Wall is usually maybe 30 or $40 in the US. You know, Dark Side of the Moon, the same. But if it's like a really clean first UK Dark Side of the Moon, it's worth a lot. You know, it just depends on which version you have. The best way to determine what that album is worth is to look it up on Discogs.com, Discogs.com. Again, this is not an advertisement for them or anything, but just a great resource that us record collectors use to determine the value of records and determine which version of the album that you have and what that album might be worth. When you find the one that's yours, it will kind of tell you what they've sold for in the past. It's a great resource that I highly recommend using. But a lot of these albums, if you just have a standard regular copy, they made hundreds of thousands and millions of these albums. So a lot of them aren't worth bukus and bukus of money. But, you know, I have the classic story of I've had people come in the store and try to sell me a copy of Michael Jackson Thriller for $20,000 or whatever. And it's just, they're not worth that because they made millions of them, you know? So it's all about supply and demand. But what's most important to take away is that these albums are great albums that we all know and love. And this is what shows up most commonly in people's collections for a reason, because they are iconic and incredible. So thank y'all for watching this video. If you haven't already, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave me a comment, follow us on Instagram. And if you are looking for some new music, if you've heard a bunch of this classic rock stuff over and over and over again, you're ready for something new, check out our website, Noblerecordstore.com, where we have a bunch of underground records that are really good classic rock sounding records, but they never quite made it into the mainstream. And it's a little breath of fresh air if you're kind of jaded on some of this stuff that you've heard a million times. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.